Hello. In this video, we're going to talk about Athol Fugard's play Master Harold and the Boys. This is one of the best plays of the 20th century. One of the best plays of all time, in my opinion. So Fugard is a South African dramatist, anti-apartheid South African dramatist, and Master Harold and the Boys is probably his most famous play. And a lot of anti-apartheid drama is very sort of agitprop, very didactic, very sort of directly political. And Fugard has very directly political plays as well. But Master Harold and the Boys is subtle and it's complicated, and the characters are complex and contradictory. The play is just really, really brilliant. So I'm going to talk about just a couple of the sort of major themes, major ideas that we get in this play, and some of the things that make the characters complex and interesting. So there are three characters in the play. There's Hallie, or Master Harold. He is a 17-year-old white South African. This is set in early 1950 in South Africa. So we have apartheid. Then we have Sam, who is a 45-year-old, I forget. He's black. Specifically, he is Basotho, and Sam is quite intelligent. He's a good teacher. He's a very ethical person, etc., etc. And then we have Willie. Willie is about the same age as Sam. He's black as well. He's not as clever. He does have a good heart. He gets frustrated very easily, in part because he's not especially intelligent, but he's a good person. So, one of the big themes of the play is ballroom dancing. Sam and Willie are both going to be involved in a ballroom dancing competition. So this becomes a big theme in the play, this idea of what ballroom dancing can represent. So early in the play, Willie is having difficulty with the quick step, and Sam is trying to help him learn it. And so Sam says it must look like romance. Willie says, now another one. That's another thing he has to remember. What's romance? Sam says, love story with happy ending. A handsome man in tails, and in his arms smiling at him a beautiful lady in evening dress. Willie says, Fred Astaire, Ginger Rogers. Sam says, you got it. Tap dance or ballroom, it's the same. Romance. In 2 weeks' time, when the judges look at you and Hilda, they must see a man and woman who are dancing their way to a happy ending. And this is kind of the big thing that ballroom dancing becomes. The big sort of idea that it reflects in the play is this desire for a happy ending. And later on, Sam and Willie, Sam especially, is explaining to Hallie exactly what this ballroom dancing championship is going to look like. And he gives this lovely idea, this lovely ideal, really. He says, there's no collisions out there, Hallie. Nobody trips or stumbles or bumps into anybody else. That's what that moment is all about. To be one of those finalists on that dance floor is like being in a dream about a world in which accidents don't happen. There's a little bit of stuff. Hallie says, Jesus, Sam, that's beautiful. Willie says, I'm starting, and he starts practicing again. Sam says, "Of course it is. That's what I've been trying to say to you all afternoon. And it's beautiful because that is what we want life to be like. But instead, like you said, Hallie, we're bumping into each other all the time. Look at the three of us this afternoon. I've bumped into Willie, the two of us have bumped into you, you've bumped into your mother, she's bumping into your dad. None of us knows the steps and there's no music playing, and it doesn't stop with us. The whole world is doing it all the time. Open a newspaper and what do you read? America's bumped into Russia, England is bumping into India, rich man bumps into poor man. Those are big collisions, Hallie. They make for a lot of bruises. People get hurt in all that bumping, and we're sick and tired of it now. It's been going on for too long, and are we never going to get it right? Learn to dance life like champions instead of always being just a bunch of beginners at it?" Hallie says, "You've got a vision, Sam." Sam says, "Not just me. That's what I'm saying to you is that everybody's got it. That's why there's only standing room left at the Centenary Hall in 2 weeks' time. Just as long as the music lasts, we're going to see 6 couples get it right, the way we want life to be." And so they go on. They go on with this a little bit, and this idea that, like, social reformers, people who are trying to improve the world, are trying to get the steps right. The metaphor of the dance does become complicated toward the end of the play. Hallie's father, who is crippled and an alcoholic, is being released from the hospital, which Hallie doesn't want because he has to help take care of his father, and it's I mean, he's a child, really. He's 17. It's an unpleasant task to have to take care of his father and all this stuff. There's more to it than that, though. I'll come back to that. But Hallie turns the dream of the dance against it. He asserts that it's not just those trying to get the steps right. It's also the cripples who are on the dance floor crashing into everyone. And it's a brutal thing to say about his father. I mean, I'll come back to that. So that's one of the big themes, this idea of dancing as a model for how life could be. The other thing we get here, because this is a South African play, it's an anti-apartheid play, and even though it's set in 1950, the first performance was in 1982, and so there was a long, by that point, tradition of anti-apartheid sentiment in South Africa. Hallie, despite the fact that Sam especially, but Sam and Willie are his best friends, really the only people he seems to ever feel comfortable with, he's also white in South Africa. And so we get, often throughout much of the play, we get just very sort of subtle elements of racism. Like, at one point, they're having Sam and Hallie are having a discussion about men of magnitude, that is, people who have genuinely benefited the human race. And Hallie at one point says, "It's deeply gratifying, Sam, to know that I haven't been wasting my time in talking to you." Then, strutting around proudly, he says, "Tolstoy may have educated his peasants, but I've educated you." So we've got that bit of it that's quite problematic. There's one other element I do want to come back to, and there's one other element I want to talk through before I get to the ending. I'm going to talk a lot about the ending of this play because it brings together a lot of stuff, and it's an extraordinarily powerful ending to the play without being didactic and without sort of losing the artistry of Fugard at his very best dramatic writing. So the other thing that's important, the other symbol that's important here is a kite. Because Hallie recounts for Sam his best memory, which is when Sam had made a kite out of some old crates, slats from old crates, brown paper, a couple of Hallie's mother's old stockings, and they'd gone out and flown it. And it's this beautiful description of like, so Hallie says he says that he'd been terrified that it was just going to crash, and he felt like that was a metaphor for his life. But then he says, I don't know how to describe it, Sam. Yeah, the miracle happened. I was running, waiting for it to crash to the ground, but instead suddenly there was something alive behind me at the end of the string, tugging at it as if it wanted to be free. I looked back. I still can't believe my eyes. It was flying, looping around and trying to climb even higher into the sky. You shouted to me to let it have some more string. I did, until there was none left, and I was just holding that piece of wood we had tied it to. You came up and joined me. You were laughing. It is this moment of tremendous pride and happiness. But then he recounts the end of that story as he remembers it. He says, you left me after that, didn't you? You explained how to get it down. We tied it to the bench so that I could sit and watch it, and you went away. I wanted you to stay, you know. I was a little scared of having to look after it by myself. And quietly Sam says, I had work to do, Hallie. A little bit later, Hallie asks, why did you make me that kite, Sam? And Sam says, I can't remember. Hallie says, truly? Sam says, too long ago, Hallie. Hallie says, yeah, I suppose it was. It's time for another one, you know. Sam says, why do you say that? Hallie says, because it feels like that. Wouldn't be a good day to fly it, though. Sam says, no, you can't fly kites on rainy days. So these three things come together. Well, these four things come together. I'll call it four things. The ballroom dancing element, the Hallie's father being crippled, the racism of white South Africa, and the image of the kite. These things come together in the ending, and I'm going to go through a lot of the ending because so much. It's one of the best endings to a play I think I've ever read. So Hallie finds out for sure that his father has come home. He tried to get his mom to convince him to stay at the hospital. She's brought him home anyway. Hallie is angry about this, and he turns his anger on Sam because he can't turn his anger on his father. So Hallie says, and as far as my father is concerned, all you need to remember is that he's your boss. Sam says, no, he isn't. I get paid by your mother. Hallie says, don't argue with me, Sam. Sam says, then don't say he's my boss. And Hallie says, he's a white man, and that's good enough for you. Sam says, I'll try to forget you said that. Hallie said, don't, because you won't be doing me a favor if you do. I'm telling you to remember it. Sam tries to get Hallie to stop because Sam is smart and he knows what is coming. Not for him, but he knows what's coming for Hallie. Hallie says, to begin with, why don't you start calling me Master Harold like Willie? Sam says, do you mean that? Hallie says, why the hell do you think I said it? Sam said, and if I don't? Hallie says, you might just lose your job. Sam, quietly and very carefully, says, if you make me say it once, I'll never call you anything else again. Hallie says, so? And the boy confronts the man. Is that meant to be a threat? Sam says, just telling you what will happen if you make me do that. You must decide what it means to you. Hallie says, well, I have. It's good news, because that is exactly what Master Harold wants from now on. Think of it as a little lesson in respect, Sam, that's long overdue. There's a very ugly bit in here. Sam essentially challenges Hallie for being overtly racist. And then Hallie spits in Sam's face. It says here, we have a long and heartfelt groan from Willie. For a few seconds, Sam doesn't move. Then taking out a handkerchief and wiping his face, he says, "It's all right, Willie." Then to Hallie, he says, "Yeah, well, you've done it, Master Harold. Yes, I'll start calling you that from now on. It won't be difficult anymore. You've hurt yourself, Master Harold. I saw it coming. I warned you, but you wouldn't listen. You've just hurt yourself bad. And you're a coward, Master Harold. The face you should be spitting in is your father's, but you used mine because you think you're safe inside your fair skin. And this time I don't mean just or decent." Pause, then moving violently toward Hallie. "Should I hit him, Willie?" Stopping Sam, Willie says, "No, but Sam." Violently, Sam says, "Why not?" Willie says, "It won't help, but Sam." Sam says, "I don't want to help. I want to hurt him." Willie says, "You also hurt yourself." Sam says, "And if he had done it to you, Willie?" Willie says, "Me? Spit at me like I was a dog?" A thought that had not occurred to him before. He looks at Hallie. "Yeah, then I want to hit him. I want to hit him hard." A dangerous few seconds as the men stand staring at the boy. Willie turns away, shaking his head. "But maybe all I do is go cry at the back. He's little boy, but Sam, little white boy. Long trousers now, but he's still a boy." Sam, his violence ebbing away into defeat as quickly as it flooded. "You're right. So go on then. Groan again, Willie. You do it better than me." To Hallie. "You don't know all of what you've just done, Master Harold. It's not just that you've made me feel dirtier than I've ever been in my life. I mean, how do I wash off yours and your father's filth? I've also failed. A long time ago I promised myself I was going to try and do something, but you've just shown me, Master Harold, that I've failed. I also got a memory of a little white boy when he was still wearing short trousers and a black man, but they're not flying a kite. It was in the old Jubilee days, after dinner one night. I was in my room. You came in and just stood against the wall looking down at the ground, and only after I'd asked you what you wanted, what was wrong, I don't know how many times, did you speak, and even then so softly I almost didn't hear you. Sam, please help me go and fetch my dad. Remember? He was dead drunk on the floor of the Central Hotel bar. They'd phoned for your mom, but you were the only one home. And do you remember how we did it? You went in first by yourself to ask permission for me to go into the bar. Then I loaded him onto my back like a baby and carried him back to the boarding house with you following behind carrying his crutches. A crowded main street with all the people watching a little white boy following his drunk father on an N's back. I felt for that little boy, Master Harold. I felt for him. After that, we still had to clean him up, remember? He'd messed in his trousers, so we had to clean him up and get him onto bed. Hallie, with great pain, says, I love him, Sam. Sam says, I know you do. That's why I tried to stop you from saying these things about him. It would have been so simple if you could just have despised him for being a weak man. But he's your father. You love him and you're ashamed of him. You're ashamed of so much. And now that's going to include yourself. That was the promise I made to myself, to try and stop that happening. After we got him to bed, you came back with me to my room and sat in a corner and carried on just looking down at the ground. And for days after that. You hadn't done anything wrong, but you went around as if you owed the world an apology for being alive. I didn't like seeing that. That's not the way a boy grows up to be a man. But the one person who should have been teaching you what that means was the cause of your shame. If you really want to know, that's why I made you that kite. I wanted you to look up, be proud of something, of yourself. And you certainly were that when I left you with it up there on the hill. Oh yeah, something else. If you ever do write it as a short story, there was a twist in our ending. I couldn't sit down there and stay with you. It was a whites-only bench. You were too young, too excited to notice then, but not anymore. If you're not careful, Master Harold, you're going to be sitting up there by yourself for a long time to come, and there won't be a kite in the sky. Hallie packs up his things to leave. And then before he does, Sam says, Hallie, I've got no right to tell you what being a man means if I don't behave like one myself, and I'm not doing so well at that this afternoon. Should we try again, Hallie? Hallie says, try what? Sam says, fly another kite, I suppose. It worked once, and this time I need it as much as you do. Hallie says, it's still raining, Sam. Can't fly kites on rainy days, remember? Sam says, so what do we do? Hope for better weather tomorrow? Hallie, with a helpless gesture, says, I don't know. I don't know anything anymore. Sam says, you sure of that, Hallie? Because it would be pretty hopeless if that was true. It would mean nothing has been learnt in here this afternoon, and there was a hell of a lot of teaching going on, one way or the other. But anyway, I don't believe you. I reckon there's one thing you know. You don't have to sit up there by yourself. You know what that bench means now, and you can leave it any time you choose. All you gotta do is stand up and walk away from it. Hallie leaves. Willie goes up quietly to Sam. Willie says, it's okay, but Sam. You see, he can't find any better words. He's going to be okay tomorrow. Changing his tone. Hey, Boat Sam. He's trying hard. You right. I think about it and you right. Tonight I find Hilda and say sorry, and make promise I won't beat her no more. You hear me, Boat Sam? Sam says, I hear you, Willie. Willie says, and when we practice, I relax and romance with her from beginning to end. Non-stop. You watch. 2 weeks' time. First prize for promising newcomers. Mr. Willie Malopo and Miss Hilda Samuels. With sudden impulse. To hell with it. I walk home. They'd wanted to play the jukebox several times, but they each only had money for bus fare. They didn't have any extra money. He goes to the jukebox, puts in a coin, and selects a record. The machine comes to life in the gray twilight, blushing its way through a spectrum of soft romantic colors. How do you say it, Boat Sam? Let's dream. Willie sways with the music and gestures for Sam to dance. As the final song plays, the two men dance together. I think it's one of the most amazing, complicated, heartbreaking endings to a play that I've ever read or seen.